I'm joined today by Santee Siouxx. She is a multi-hyphenate. She's an entrepreneur. She's a content creator. She's an activist. She's also a dancer. She does so many things. And I really thank you for being here with me today. When this is coming out, it's going to be Truth and Reconciliation Week, and we're going to have Orange Shirt Day coming up September 30th. And I know in other interviews I've seen with you, you've expressed how important it is for everyone to involve and educate themselves on historical injustices and all the harms inflicted on Indigenous people in this country. And I'm very curious to know, what are the best ways that everyone can get involved in these events, and both kind of online and offline?
Well, I was just talking to my relatives that are Indigenous in the United States of America, and how much of a shift the Truth and Reconciliation really changed that for the non-Indigenous people in Canada, and how you can feel the physical changes in our day-to-day lives. And what I mean by physical is that the body can pick up racism, systemic racism. We could feel right to the services, to the airports and airlines we decide to fly with as an Indigenous people. We could feel those changes, those impacts that the TRC has made for the Indigenous people in Canada, just by having that day and just by having that acknowledgement of the past and the historical injustices and trauma that happened directly to, not only that, to my father as well. And so it's right within our families. And so as an Indigenous woman, I faced racism in every sector of government, the healthcare system, the educational system that you could think of. And so it's normal for me. And so when people talk about online hate and everything like that, it's like not as bad as what we grew up with. And so unfortunately, that's how it is for many of us Indigenous content creators. We're used to this. Like, we've been experiencing racism since we were born, unfortunately, right into the healthcare systems in our hospitals, right? And so that's just a little bit of the experience. It's for me in my lived experience, and how much it means for me as Truth and Reconciliation, how much it changed for Indigenous people across Turtle Island. Unfortunately, United States, they have a way to go, because they haven't really felt that change, because they don't have days acknowledgements like the calls to action in the TRC, right? And so it's important to talk about that, just how much Canada has made that shift and change, and doing podcasts and stuff like this to acknowledge and hear our stories, right? And so I want to acknowledge everyone in non-Indigenous Canada for taking these initiatives. I can physically feel the change. I could feel that it has changed into the day-to-day lives. Where do I go get gas? Where do I go get my groceries? What Shoppers Drug Mart I go to? I don't feel it as much, but we still have work to do. And acknowledging those injustices and talking about them in seeing Canada really hear it for the first time, to me, it's not shocking to Indigenous people, because we've been talking about these stories. We've known about the unmarked graves. We've known about the schools and what was happening in there, and the brutalizations of Indigenous children. And so we've always known, like, since I was born. And so now, this is why TRC is so important, is that Canada is coming into this stage of, it's going to be really uncomfortable for people like that to acknowledge this. And then there's like the feelings, kind of like the feelings of learning this history, and kind of like the guilt. But I want people to understand, like, don't feel guilty about it, because what it's about learning from it, hearing our stories, and creating a better future and an equal society for all. And so that's why it's so important to have these kind of discussions and creating these kind of spaces for authentic Indigenous representation and voices, and understanding like where we come from. Because for me, Santee Siouxx actually represents my Dakota side from my father's lineage, and where we come from as Dakota people. And the Santee is represents 4 of our Dakota bands. Like, we don't really call ourselves Indigenous. We prefer to be called by our tribes and our nations, because that's like saying I am Canadian and American, for example. But because you're leaving out so much of where we come from when you say Indigenous. And so that's why we like to say, for me, I am Dakota Wahpektuwan tribe of the Oshete Shakoan. And that represents exactly my language, my culture, my dances, my songs, my ceremonies. And so that's why it's important to acknowledge our tribes as well. And so, and my mother, she's a Dawa, which represents the 3 three fire confederations of the Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Adawa. And that's a whole different song, dances, and language. And so this is what TRC teaches. It teaches our language, it teaches our history, and also the celebration of the beauty of the culture that we could share with. And to me, as a young child, it was like almost like a missed opportunity for Canada to really miss out on this rich culture and collaboration together and developing and working in partnerships together. And that's the kind of Canada that I've always visualized since I was a young girl, because we would go to schools and perform for non-Indigenous schools. And I've been performing since I was a young little kid. And in the importance of, my life would be like, I would experience racism one day at our swim team, and then I would go perform in the city for kids that are just blown away. That was my life growing up. And it's like one day it's racism, one day it's like people are just so, and like they're just love learning the culture. So it's been like that for a lot of Indigenous people, and how we grew up in Canada and experienced that kind of upbringing, unfortunately. And that's why TRC isn't so important. Just having that shift for future generations and for our children to see that beauty within all of our relations. That's what we say in our language. We say mitakwe oyasin, and that means we're all related, and not just as cousins and mothers and fathers of relations. It's like your interconnectedness to creator and earth. You're no better than the plants that are behind you, right? And that's like we see that as your relative, because those plants have an important job. You're no better than the lake that is there. It's not there for you, it's a part of you, and it's part of your existence. And so that's why with Indigenous people, we've always had that understanding of when long ago when settlers came, like we're in relation with each other, and that's why we've always helped. And so that's why I see it, the TRC could mend that relationship. And I always think about how beautiful Canada would have been if we just had that from the start. But I'm very hopeful that TRC has really created that shift and has really created that the voice of the Indigenous people of Canada. So I don't know if that
You've
answers your question.
said you've said so many things that I would love to touch on. A couple things that come to mind. One being, the learning piece, which I really, appreciate, and the fact that we're all learning, and there's so much for everybody to learn about the different Indigenous cultures. I think what's also really interesting is the point you made that when you were young, you would go into schools, and there were sort of limited ways that people could learn about these cultures. Whereas now, with the digital world, there are so many more opportunities. Do you see that sort of over the last, decade, we've seen because of the online world, an increase of awareness and knowledge? And what role has the online world played in that for you?
I think the online world has been a really important tool of the world seeing our history, and so from our teachings, from my upbringing, is that we've always had to evolve with society, and we're always taught to use the tools that are given within us. And that's like where we always stress education, and our elders would stress education, so you could evolve as a society. And so for me, I had to really think about it, because there's already amazing Indigenous content creators out there that are already doing so many amazing things. And you can already tell that they're teaching about their different tribes. They're teaching the difference between Indigenous versus, Aboriginal terms, and these important teachings that we could share with the world. And for me, TikTok, Instagram, and all the social media platforms, my feedback was a lot of them didn't even know we existed still. And that's mostly in like United States. And I was like, that was like one of the most largest Indigenous Native American populations in the world is in the United States. And they would teach in the educational curriculum that we no longer exist, and you can only see us in museums, and the natives that are out there, they're not really native. And so they really create a negative narrative that social media just overpowered. And I would get students in my comments saying that they've learned more on TikTok than they learned in their educational curriculums at their schools. And so that's what I think is really important, which TRC stresses, that, listen to our stories, create these spaces. Education, to me personally, I would love to see the educational curriculum in Canada be updated, and teaching first and foremost the treaties. What do the treaties mean? Because right now, the provincial and federal government, they say tax-paying dollars, but which is not entirely true, because it's a treaty to nation relationship, and that's where we create the stress of the racism. And so those kind of important terminologies need to be removed from the educational curriculum. They teach World War II and One before they teach the history of the treaties and how Canada and those relationships, those important foundational relationships, were built. And so I would love to see that changed. Teaching the children about the treaty relationships, that would be so amazing. And that could remove so much bullying and hatred and everything, and understanding that this was a nation to nation relationship, and we still carry ourselves and honor ourselves in that way. And that's why I feel, taking all that, what I just said, how many Indigenous content creators summarize that in their own unique way. And because that our youth, they have such a short attention span, you have to really jump on the trends. You have to be able to teach so much of what I just said in like a 10-second video, and you have to be really creative with it. So if anyone out there is listening and wants to express their creative ability, take my advice, just post it. Just post it. Don't be scared. You could change lives. That's the way I see it. There could be somebody out there that's watching you that you could really mean a lot to them, seeing what you're saying and posting and inspiring them. You never know. And so you can take social media. There's positive and negatives in everything. It's just your core values and what you believe in, and how you carry and represent yourselves and your nations. And then unfortunately, I am proud to represent Canada, but I'm also very proud to represent Indigenous issues, which I believe it's going to build that positive relationship. And it's not easy to do, but it's so important to do. So you can't be afraid to use these tools. You have to be able to use them in the best capabilities as you can. And that's my biggest advice. If you want to get into social media content creation to share your voice and your gifts with the world, do it.
I love that, because that's one of the most positive things about social media, is that you're able to have so much more representation and able to tell, everyone can tell their individual stories. And I think that's really important. And I know you touched on it briefly there, sort of on the negativity side of things. I know you've spoken quite a lot about this. And I know, you receive online, cyberbullying, abuse, hate. I'm wondering, how do you kind of personally cope with this on a day-to-day basis?
So when I got invited to speak at the Governor General Symposium back in April, it was about online hate. And they told me that they turned off their comments, and there was really interesting dialogue there that was happening. Unfortunately for me, like, I had to speak my truth in terms of how I deal with the online hate. And I was like, sorry, Governor, I actually keep my comments on because it increases the engagement, and it allows this content to reach the right people, whether it's positive or negative. I know it's going to reach racist people. I know it's going to reach so much people, but the more the racist people comment, it's better for me, because it's hitting those people's algorithm, and they are probably the ones who need to learn this stuff the most. And so people kind of like, yeah, but what about, a teacher approached me after, and she's like, it's really hard for us to read those comments. And I'm like, I understand that. Like, I definitely monitor. I monitor if somebody is being attacked in my comments. I will block them, and I'd reach out to that follower. I'm like, please don't get involved with them. Like, I definitely do that. And I'll stop if I see something is being very negative. Like, I do monitor. And but for me personally, I have a lot of Indigenous nations across Canada. In order for us to be where we are today, a lot of our elders has taught us not only how to carry ourselves when we deal with racism or negativity, but also how to care for yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. And one way that we were taught to do that, and you could see this across all of the Indigenous nations across Canada, there's 634 nations that has signed or that are in Canada, and the Métis and the Inuit. And a lot of them, they have so much resilience because what they've did, they did not allow themselves to get emotionally involved in the political structures that weren't their ways. They didn't get into the mess of the federal and provincial policies that govern them. Regardless what happened there, we always carried ourselves to govern ourselves and how we were always taught for over the 500,000 to 600,000 of years, right? But when we had contact back 500 years ago, we knew not to get emotionally involved with their stuff they carried, and to protect ourselves spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically. It was the number one priority. And that's how Indigenous people, they really were able to be so resilient. They were able to focus on themselves and not allow themselves to get caught up in the mess of what was going on in Canada, right? And so that's why, unfortunately, like when the bureaucrats in Ottawa, they're so caught up into the politics, it leads to drug addictions, it leads to pill prescription abuse, it leads to alcoholism, and it's not really talked about in those spaces. But a lot of people have mental health issues, emotional health issues, because they're not addressing it. They're getting too emotionally involved, which leads to things of depression, anxiety issues. It leads to things like cancer, diabetes, and you physically don't take care of yourself. When you let these negativity come to you, you could get physically sick and physically ill. And so we've always had that knowledge, that old knowledge, that you have to not allow yourself to get emotionally involved when it comes to this negativity. And I deal with it a lot. Okay, I'll be honest, sometimes I have a little fun in my comments because I have that wisdom, and I don't let the comments get to me. I get kind of cheeky at some of the people who are being really rude. I'll be cheeky to them. I'll say, yeah, thanks for commenting, increasing my engagement to reach more people like you. And like, I know sometimes I can't do that because I have to be safe too, like physically. Like, these people could be murderers or whatever, right? So so I don't engage too much to the comments, but for the most times I don't engage into the negativity and the racism. And for the unfortunately the most part, I'm like, it's funny because I grew up with a lot of racism, and I dealt with the physical impacts of it. And so on social media, I always laugh. I think I talk to Creator a lot. I'm like, Creator, you are hilarious. You literally brought me into this world. I dealt with all the physical racism. You put me in the space of social media, and now you increased awareness about it, but the races are the ones are pushing the content now. And so I kind of look at it like that, and I'm like, huh, Creator really has it working for us sometimes. Yeah.
That is such a fascinating take and something that I hadn't considered. But I think what it does is it touches on the idea that if we're not reaching people who either, need this message, disagree, are racist,
Hmm.
we're speaking into an echo chamber, right?
Yeah.
So you're right in that even though it's difficult, you are reaching people and maybe you're changing some people's minds. And just having that kind of mental toughness and that ability to disconnect from those sentiments is really admirable. Like I think that's kind of a really interesting way of looking at it. I think people could learn a lot from that. It's not easy to turn yourself off from it, I'm sure,
No.
and I'm sure there are times when it's a struggle. But I think from what I'm hearing from you in terms of the benefits and the greater good that can come of it, it seems like it's a worthwhile trade-off in your case.
It is, because when you think about it, we're all here on a very short time on Earth. And what can you do to leave this world a better place? And if it takes me, like, tomorrow is never promised. I know I'm getting to like real deep like feelings here, but this is how I operate as a spirit, as a as a person, is that you got to do good as much as you can, while you're here, because we're all here for a short period of time. And so if I will I regret leaving that content behind? But no, that could lead change to so many people. And if tomorrow's not promised for me, I won't regret leaving that behind, because there's something always can leave behind for the next generation. And that's the way I see it. I thinking about the future, and I know everyone's not tough as me, but I hope what you hear today from this, from Media Smarts, that you could take that knowledge and that wisdom and that courage as well and follow suit. And that's what it's about. And even when it comes to my partnerships, people are like, how do you pick and choose your partnerships? And I'm like, some of it has like very positive and negatives when you do decide to do partnerships, and I'm very selective. And so it's like, okay, yes, there was some controversy with this campaign previously, but if we don't do it, what are we doing to create that change? We have to put ourselves in these uncomfortable places. Yeah, a lot of people aren't going to like it, but I think about it 7 generations ahead. I always think 7 generations ahead. If I don't do this, what are the changes that could possibly like not happen for me being that voice? And so if I can pass that down by attending here today with Media Smarts and sharing that wisdom, I'm happy. I'm a happy spirit to go back to creator and know that I did this work.
I love that. And we really appreciate the opportunity to have your voice and to hear all of this. And I want to leave us with one question and sort of shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
We ask all our guests as part of this series about what's a piece of media you've consumed that you're really into right now, whether it's a TV show or a movie or a podcast or a blog, anything, something that you'd like to share that you've enjoyed.
Oh my God. So I don't really watch TV that much. I'm guilty of scrolling TikTok for powwow TikTok. I'm sorry. I'm always on powwow TikTok. I have icons, and then some of them are Beyonce for people, but for me, I'm just gonna drop some dancers' names here, like Josie Little Sky. She's my favorite fancy shell dancer, so I'm watching her all the time. I just love watching these beautiful women that are mothers, that are entrepreneurs as well. They're just out there jamming still. We start dancing from like tiny top when we can walk all the way till like we're 80 years old. So like to me, they are like the sports stars of Indigenous country. And I just like, so yeah, my media, I'm sorry, it's so boring. I'm watching power TikToks.
I love
Even
it.
on YouTube, I turn on YouTube and I'll search my favorite dancers and I'll just watch them. I'm like, oh, they're so beautiful.
I love it. Well, we'll all have to go check them out.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't drop all the rest of the names, but yeah, there's so many. Like Kay Claremont, she is a champ in like our fancy shell dancing. Like she's so beautiful. Oh, Lauren Oakes, those girls. I'm always watching them on TikTok and promoting them. I even post them a lot, like on my stories. I'm like, they're such iconics. But not only that, they're amazing role models. And I was talking to some other dancers and that are on TikTok and social media. I'm like, you know what's crazy? How come we don't have an ESPN for like all these amazing dancers? Because they are like sports icons as well. Like, cause these dances aren't easy. Like, you need to be in shape. You need to be able to train. You need to be in the gym. You need to eat right. Like, if you go one summer without dancing, you're out of shape. Like, it's like boxing, like anything else. Sorry, I'm just rambling, but I just wanted to
No, I
share
love
that.
it. Olympics 2028,
I don't know why
right?
we're not there. I don't know why we're not there.
That would
Sorry.
be amazing.
Quick
That
story. We danced in the Olympics. I was very lucky to dance in the Olympics with the Vancouver Olympics in 2010 when I was like a youth. It was so amazing that Canada did that. Again, TRC energy. It was amazing. But like, what's crazy is that we were taking pictures of the athletes in the backstage, and they were taking pictures of us because they didn't know we existed. And I was like so shocked. I was like, oh, like we were performing, but I'm like, we need to get into the next Olympics and have the Indigenous dances compete because they are beautiful. And like, I feel like in the future, I'm just gonna put this out in the universe, in the media, like non-indigenous people would have their favorite dancer, like they would have their favorite, just like any favorite sports athlete, right? I really feel that could happen and it should happen. It's a missed opportunity. I'm just putting that out there.
I would love to see. I love dance competition
Oh
shows.
yeah.
So that would be super fun.
Netflix is sleeping on a giant. Okay, so Toronto is that I don't know if you're from Toronto, but Toronto is having a big dance competition at the Union Station on the 28th, and part of a reconciliation celebration. They're having a women's fancy, men's fancy verse each other, and then they're having jingle dress 1v1vs, which means that the best will verse each other. Highly recommend you go. It's gonna probably happen yearly. I really think this is an amazing event, and it'd be cool to have ESPN there. No kidding. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. So many great things, to learn from everything that you shared today, and I really appreciate it. And I appreciate, being kind of in partnership with you. It's terrific.
Yes. I'm glad it worked out, and thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to me. I always appreciate that I can share my voice in these spaces with everyone. And yeah, thank you for listening to me. Pida Mayaye, Miigwej, Wopada. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you, Miigwej.